April 8th, 1942. The skies over Germany. The hum of German engines fills the air as the Luftwaffe jets streak across the horizon. Below, the Nazis are entrenched in a brutal battle for supremacy, having already overrun much of Europe. Their military production capabilities, powered by Nazi doctrine and resources, seem unassailable. Yet, deep in the factories of America, an engine of production is quietly shifting the balance of power. Tanks, planes, and weapons are rolling off assembly lines at a pace that would soon overwhelm the Axis. In the early days of World War II, the German military had the upper hand. Their tanks, like the fearsome Tiger I and Panther, were considered technological marvels. Armored behemoths that dominated the battlefield, they were symbols of the might of Nazi engineering. But even the best of these machines had their limits, especially as the war stretched on. The Germans, reliant on a complex system of production and highly specialized components, struggled to keep pace with the sheer scale of Allied production. The Axis had long taken pride in their advanced technology. The Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt 109, for example, was renowned for its speed and maneuverability, and the German tanks had outclassed the Allies in several key battles. But as the war wore on, the German industrial base began to strain under the pressure. Fuel shortages, bombings of factories, and shortages of raw materials all took their toll on production. Even the mighty Panther, designed to counter the Soviet T-34, could not be produced in sufficient numbers to keep up with the Allied advances. It was simply too complex and costly to maintain on a large scale. Across the Atlantic, a different story was unfolding. The United States, untouched by the war on its home soil, was rapidly transitioning from a peacetime to a wartime economy. Factories were retooled to produce vast quantities of war materials. The production capacity of the U.S. was not just a matter of technology, but of scale. Where Germany relied on precision and specialized machinery, the Americans embraced mass production. Tanks, planes, and trucks were churned out in vast quantities, standardized for easy assembly and repair. By 1942, the U.S. was rapidly outproducing its enemies not only in sheer numbers but also in logistical capacity. The Lend-Lease Act, passed in 1941, was a crucial turning point. This piece of legislation allowed the U.S. to send military aid to allied nations, including tanks, aircraft, and ammunition, to sustain their fight against the Axis. While the U.S. was not yet directly involved in the war, it began to provide critical support to those who were. Among the most important contributions were the M4 Sherman tanks, which would soon prove to be one of the most decisive pieces of equipment in the Allied arsenal. At the time, the Soviet Union was bearing the brunt of the German assault on the Eastern Front. The Red Army had been caught off guard by the scale of the Nazi invasion, and their existing tank force, though effective, was insufficient to counter the German blitzkrieg. The M4 Sherman was not the most advanced tank on the battlefield. Its 75mm gun was less powerful than the German Tiger's 88mm cannon, and it lacked the heavily armored design of the Panther. But it had one crucial advantage: the ability to be produced in overwhelming numbers. In the midst of the ferocious fighting on the Eastern Front, the Soviets began to receive M4 Shermans through the Lend-Lease program. These tanks, simple yet reliable, proved to be a game-changer. They were easy to maintain, and their standardization meant that parts were interchangeable, making repairs less of a logistical challenge. The Soviet commanders quickly adapted their tactics to incorporate the M4 Sherman into their strategy, and soon the presence of these American tanks was a defining feature of the war on the Eastern Front. December 5th, 1942. The Russian front. Snow flurries swirl through the air as the Soviet 5th Tank Division, led by Major Ivan Petrov, moves into position on the outskirts of the village of Tula. The ground is frozen solid, and the remnants of battle scarred the landscape. Alongside the familiar T-34 seconds, Soviet forces now have a new addition, the M4 Sherman. It is a sight the soldiers had never anticipated, yet its presence has become essential to their fight against the Nazi invaders. The M4 Sherman rolls through the mud, its engines rumbling like a steady heartbeat. Major Petrov peers through his binoculars at the formation ahead, rows upon rows of these American tanks. They are not as imposing as the German Tigers or Panthers, which had struck fear into the hearts of Soviet tankers. but their reliability and numbers are undeniable. For the first time in months, there is a glimmer of hope. These tanks, with their rugged engines and simplified design, offer something the Germans' meticulously engineered machines cannot: endurance. The Soviets had long suffered from a lack of material support. While their T-34 seconds were formidable in terms of armor and mobility, the constant strain of battle meant that the Soviet factories struggled to keep up with replacements. The arrival of the M4 Sherman, via Lend-Lease shipments, provides an essential lifeline. These tanks arrive in large numbers, easily replacing losses and allowing the Red Army to sustain its offensive. Unlike the German tanks, which required extensive maintenance and specialist repair teams, the Shermans could be repaired with basic tools in field workshops, often by the same crews who operated them. Major Petrov nods with approval as a Sherman fires its 75mm gun at a German Panzer IV, the shell ripping through the thin armor with ease. It's not the most powerful weapon on the battlefield, but in the hands of a determined crew, it is enough. "We'll make do," he thinks to himself as the tank lumbers past him, its track marks leaving deep impressions in the snow. While the Soviets initially hesitated to rely on these tanks, it quickly became apparent that the M4 Sherman was an essential part of their strategy. Not only was it a reliable combat machine, but it also offered a massive advantage in logistics. Unlike the German tanks, which often broke down in the harsh winter conditions, the Sherman's simple design allowed it to continue operating, even in the most brutal conditions. Soviet engineers quickly adapted to the new tank, making modifications to suit their needs, and by 1943, the M4 Sherman was becoming an integral part of the Red Army's armor division. July 1943. Kursk, Soviet Union. The Battle of Kursk marks a turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. The Germans, intent on retaking the initiative, launched their offensive against Soviet defenses. But this time, the Soviet forces are ready. Among their ranks, M4 Shermans are prepared to meet the German tanks head-on. The battle that unfolds is one of the largest tank engagements in history. The Soviets, bolstered by the steady supply of Lend-Lease tanks, are able to maintain a stronger, more flexible defense. The M4 Sherman, with its simple design and ease of repair, is critical in ensuring that Soviet lines hold under the massive German assault. While the Germans deploy their Tigers and Panthers, the sheer number of Shermans allows the Soviets to outlast them. Despite being outgunned, the Sherman proves its worth in sheer endurance. As German tanks are knocked out of action, Soviet crews simply swap in fresh tanks from their seemingly endless supply, while the Germans struggle to replace their losses. The battle turns into a war of attrition, and it is the Allies' industrial capacity, embodied in the American M4 Sherman, that ultimately tips the scales in the Soviets' favor. February 17th, 1943. Battle of Stalingrad. The frostbite of the Soviet winter gnaws at the exposed skin of soldiers as they huddle in trenches, their breath visible in the cold air. Above them, the sky is gray, heavy with the promise of more bloodshed. The once imposing city of Stalingrad has been reduced to rubble, but the fighting continues unabated. Soviet forces are pushing forward, and in their ranks, the M4 Shermans stand as silent titans among the ruins. On the German side, Colonel Heinrich Müller watches grimly as Soviet tanks advance, cutting through the remains of the German positions. His division, the 6th Panzer, had once been feared across the Eastern Front for its strength and precision. Now, it is struggling to hold the line against a relentless wave of Soviet armor, with the M4 Shermans at the forefront. Müller's eyes narrow as another Sherman bursts through a wall of debris, its tracks grinding over the frozen ground. He's seen enough of these tanks to know they are not like the Soviet T-34 seconds. The T-34, with its sloped armor, was a formidable adversary, but the Shermans were different. They were everywhere, mass-produced, reliable, and almost impossible to outlast. Each Sherman that fell was quickly replaced by another, while his own Panthers, despite their superior firepower and armor, were becoming increasingly unreliable. The Germans' over-reliance on their technological superiority and intricate designs is now their undoing. The M4 Sherman, though less powerful, is built for endurance, something the Germans' advanced but complex tanks cannot claim. As the battle rages on, Müller orders his men to withdraw, knowing that the relentless assault by these American tanks is breaking their morale. For the German soldiers in the field, the realization is dawning. The Allies' industrial capabilities are too much to overcome. The M4 Shermans are not just a tactical challenge, they are a manifestation of the American industrial machine. Their sheer numbers, logistical support, and simplicity in design make them the perfect counter to Germany's high-tech but increasingly unsustainable war machine. June 22, 1944. Normandy, France. The beaches of Normandy are strewn with the wreckage of the initial German defenses. Allied forces have secured a foothold on the continent, and the battle for Europe is now fully underway. The Germans, having stretched their defenses thin, now face a new enemy, the massive wave of American armor that has poured into France. General Wilhelm von Lüttwitz, leading the 21st Panzer Division, watches as more Shermans roll past his position. The German defensive lines are crumbling under the weight of Allied attacks, and the presence of the Shermans is exacerbating the situation. There's no way to stop them, von Lüttwitz mutters under his breath, watching as the Shermans bulldoze their way through the German defenses. His Panthers and Tigers, which had once been the terror of the battlefield, now seem like relics. The sight of another Sherman advancing is no longer something the German forces can counter with ease. While the German tanks are more powerful individually, their complexity makes them difficult to repair, and with supply lines stretched thin, they cannot be replaced quickly. A single damaged Panther could take weeks to repair, and with the constant barrage from Allied artillery and air support, many tanks simply don't make it off the battlefield. On the other hand, the M4 Sherman, with its standardized parts and simpler design, can be repaired in the field with minimal tools, ensuring that any damage is quickly fixed and the tank can return to combat. The Germans, once the dominant force on the battlefield, are now faced with a scenario they had not anticipated. The Allies' ability to outproduce and sustain their forces, particularly through tanks like the M4 Sherman, is breaking their resolve. The German war machine, so accustomed to relying on superior technology, finds itself at a disadvantage. It's not the firepower of the Sherman that defeats the Germans, but the industrial might behind it. July 10th, 1944, Normandy, France. The invasion of Normandy has turned into a nightmare for the German Wehrmacht. In the weeks following D-Day, the Allies have poured thousands of troops and tanks onto the beaches, their forces growing by the day. The Germans, stretched thin and running low on supplies, have fought fiercely but are slowly being pushed back. The air is thick with the roar of Allied aircraft, the constant rumble of artillery, and the unmistakable hum of American tanks, especially the M4 Shermans, as they bulldoze through the once proud German defenses. Major Hans Becker, a veteran tank commander of the 1st SS Panzer Division, watches as another wave of Shermans pushes through the hedgerows of Normandy, crushing the remnants of the German defensive line beneath their tracks. His division, already under severe strain, is no match for the overwhelming tide of Allied armor. The M4 Shermans, while not as powerful as the German Tigers and Panthers, are an unstoppable force in sheer numbers. Each Sherman represents the immense American industrial capacity, and Becker knows that his Panzer Division is simply unable to keep up. Another Sherman, Becker mutters to himself, his hands gripping the cold steel of his Panzer IV's turret. The Germans' technological edge is no longer enough. The Tigers may have been able to destroy Shermans with a single shot, but the sheer quantity of American tanks flooding the battlefield ensures that for every Tiger destroyed, 10 more Shermans take its place. We can't hold them. Not like this. The Germans had never anticipated the volume of Lend-Lease tanks the Allies would field. The Shermans, easy to produce and maintain, give the Allies an overwhelming advantage. For every German tank knocked out of action, a Sherman can be repaired and back on the front line in a matter of hours. German tanks, by contrast, require a network of specialists to fix even the smallest problems, and in the chaos of war, that support is often too far away. The Germans had underestimated the power of mass production, and now they are paying the price. August 15th, 1944. The push through France. The Allied forces have broken through the Normandy defenses and are advancing rapidly through France. The Germans, already reeling from their losses in Normandy, are now retreating under the combined weight of American artillery, air power, and the relentless wave of Shermans advancing through the countryside. General Erich von Manstein, one of the last remaining commanders, with any hope of halting the Allied advance, surveys the battlefield from a hilltop. Below him, The landscape is littered with the wrecks of German armor, Panthers, Tigers, and Panzer IVs, all reduced to twisted metal by the steady onslaught of American tanks. Yet, it is not the destruction of these powerful German machines that has broken the Wehrmacht's will. It is the sheer persistence of the Allied forces. Sherman, after Sherman, rolls across the battlefield, their engines purring as they march toward victory. Von Manstein knows that his forces cannot sustain this kind of attrition. The Sherman is not the most fearsome tank on the battlefield, but it is reliable, and it never stops coming. Where the German tanks require delicate maintenance, the American tanks can keep fighting day after day, thanks to their simple yet robust design. For every tank that falls, another takes its place. For the Germans, this is a war of resources and endurance, and the Allies have the advantage in both. The German army, which had once relied on technological superiority and precision, now faces a different kind of war, one where the ability to produce and sustain machinery matters more than the raw power of individual machines. The M4 Sherman, though not as sophisticated as the German models, becomes a symbol of this new kind of warfare, one that the Germans cannot match. March 7th, 1945. The Rhine River, Germany. The last vestiges of the German resistance are crumbling as Allied forces move rapidly toward Berlin. The M4 Shermans, having crossed through the heart of France, are now deep in the German countryside, their engines growling as they roll along the snow-covered roads. The once feared Wehrmacht is no longer a formidable opponent. It is broken, disorganized, and exhausted. The Nazis, unable to replace their tanks at the same pace as the Americans, face a force that seems unstoppable, not because of any single tank's firepower, but because of the overwhelming industrial might backing the Allies. General Dwight D. Eisenhower watches from his command post as the final push into Germany begins. His troops, bolstered by tens of thousands of tanks like the M4 Sherman, have the Germans on the defensive. Eisenhower knows the outcome is certain. The Lend-Lease program, which had once seemed like an auxiliary effort, has proven to be the linchpin in the Allied victory. The sheer numbers of tanks flooding into Europe have exhausted German forces, and now, with Berlin within reach, the German war machine is about to be brought to its knees. In the fields of the Rhine, American tanks advance in tight formations, cutting through the remnants of German defensive lines. The Shermans, easy to repair and sustain, continue to roll forward, their tracks marking the final march of Nazi Germany's downfall. The Germans had hoped to hold back the Americans with their last line of defense, but the sheer force of the Allied supply chain and the constant replenishment of tanks and equipment is a tide the Germans cannot stem. For the German soldiers who remain, the sight of another Sherman advancing, unstoppable and unrelenting, is the final blow. Their Tigers and Panthers, once symbols of German might, lie in ruins on the battlefield. They were designed for power, precision, and firepower, but in the face of relentless American production, they are obsolete. Where a Sherman falls, another is ready to replace it. The Germans cannot match this scale of production. As the Americans push deeper into Germany, the iconic M4 Shermans, with their rugged design, simple mechanics, and mass production, proved to be the ultimate weapon in the battle of attrition. While the Germans had always relied on technological supremacy, the Allies have learned that victory is not always about the most powerful weapon on the field. It's about who can produce and sustain that weapon in the longest and most efficient manner. April 30th, 1945. Berlin, Germany. The war in Europe is over. The city of Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany, has fallen. In the streets, the wreckage of German tanks litters the ground, but the sound of Allied victory rings through the air. The M4 Shermans, having traveled from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany, stand as silent witnesses to the end of the Third Reich. For the Allies, the war has been won not just through superior firepower or strategy, but through the unyielding power of American industry. The final push into Berlin is a symbolic moment. The once unbeatable German military is no more. The destruction of Berlin is not just the fall of a city, it is the collapse of the entire Nazi war machine. The Allies, with their endless supply of tanks like the Sherman, have outlasted their enemies. The Germans, despite their technological innovations, could not match the sheer scale of the Allied war effort. The Battle of Berlin marks the end of the European theater. As the last remnants of the German military surrender, The Allies, led by the United States, stand victorious. The M4 Sherman, though overshadowed by more powerful tanks, has proven its worth in ways no one could have predicted when it first rolled off the assembly lines. Its reliability, simplicity, and sheer numbers were key to crushing the German forces and securing victory in Europe. As the war in Europe concludes, the M4 Sherman will fade from the front lines, replaced by more advanced models. Yet, its legacy will live on in the annals of military history, a symbol not just of the technological prowess of the Allies, but of their ability to outproduce and outlast their enemies, no matter how formidable. May 2nd, 1945. Berlin, Germany. The ruins of Berlin lie in stillness, broken only by the occasional echo of Allied footsteps. The flags of the United States and the Soviet Union are hoisted over the Reichstag, marking the end of Nazi rule in Europe. The city, once a symbol of totalitarian power, now stands as a testament to the destructive force of war. In the streets, the wreckage of German tanks, Tigers, Panthers, and Panzer IVs are scattered like the carcasses of fallen beasts. But among the debris, the American M4 Shermans stand as the true victors of the battlefield. These tanks, once sent to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program, now stand as silent sentinels of a new world order. For the Allied forces, the end of the war marks not just the collapse of the Axis powers, but the dawn of a new geopolitical landscape. The United States, having emerged as the world's industrial powerhouse, now leads the charge in reshaping Europe. The sheer scale of American production during the war, from tanks and planes to artillery and ammunition, has proven that military might is not simply a matter of advanced technology, but of industrial capacity and logistics. The M4 Sherman, despite not being the most powerful or advanced tank on the battlefield, has become a symbol of the American industrial effort. It was the backbone of the Allied armored forces, providing a steady stream of firepower in both the European and Pacific theaters. Its design was simple, its parts interchangeable, and its ability to be mass-produced was unmatched. While the German Tigers and Panthers may have had superior firepower and armor, they were outpaced by the production capabilities of the United States. For every German tank that was destroyed, another Sherman rolled off the production line, ready to take its place. As the war in Europe ends, the M4 Sherman's impact is felt not just on the battlefield, but in the post-war rebuilding efforts. The Lend-Lease program, which had once seemed like a temporary measure to support the Allied forces, has proven to be a cornerstone of the United States' role in the world. The equipment and supplies sent to the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and other Allied nations helped sustain their resistance against Nazi Germany. But beyond the tanks and weapons, the United States' ability to outproduce its enemies reshaped the global balance of power. The U.S. economy, having shifted to a war footing, now emerged as the world's leading industrial power, ready to dominate the post-war era. August 1945. The United States, post-war economy. In the aftermath of the war, the United States finds itself not only victorious but also transformed. The scale of the Lend-Lease program and the industrial effort that went into producing tanks like the M4 Sherman is now a source of national pride. American factories that once churned out war materials now begin to focus on rebuilding a shattered world. The U.S. takes on a leadership role in the establishment of international organizations like the United Nations, positioning itself as the preeminent global power. At the same time, the Soviet Union, having borne the brunt of the war on the Eastern Front, now looks to the U.S. as both a partner and a rival in the emerging Cold War. The M4 Sherman, a symbol of the American contribution to the defeat of Nazi Germany, becomes part of the Soviet narrative as well. The Lend-Lease tanks helped sustain Soviet forces during the darkest days of the war, and while the Soviets quickly replaced them with their own models, the legacy of the M4 Sherman is not forgotten. The war's end also marks the beginning of a new arms race, as both the United States and the Soviet Union vie for technological supremacy. Yet, despite the emergence of more advanced tanks and military technology in the years following the war, the lesson learned from the M4 Sherman remains crucial. The ability to produce and sustain military hardware at an unprecedented scale is a decisive factor in modern warfare. While the German tanks were technologically advanced, they were ultimately outlasted by the sheer industrial might of the Allies. The legacy of the M4 Sherman and the broader Lend-Lease program extends far beyond the battlefield. It represents the triumph of mass production, the power of logistics, and the importance of industrial capacity in shaping the outcome of global conflict. While the German war machine was brought to its knees by superior tactics and technology, it was the Allies' ability to produce and maintain those technologies that ensured victory. June 1945. The world has changed forever. The war in Europe has concluded, but the effects of the Lend-Lease program and the M4 Sherman tank reverberate throughout the post-war world. The immense contributions made by the United States during the war, not just in terms of direct combat but in logistical and industrial support, have shifted the global balance of power. While the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom were crucial in the Allied victory, it was the American industrial machine, which had rapidly transformed into the arsenal of democracy, that played the decisive role in tipping the scales. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the focus shifts to rebuilding. Europe lies in ruins, its cities leveled, and economies shattered. But the United States, with its booming economy and massive manufacturing capabilities, is poised to take a leading role in this reconstruction. The Marshall Plan, designed to provide economic aid to war-torn Europe, is born from the same ideology that drove the Lend-Lease Act. The same spirit of industrial mobilization that had flooded Europe with tanks, aircraft, and military supplies now begins to rebuild the continent's shattered infrastructure. The M4 Sherman, though no longer a frontline weapon in the new Cold War, leaves a profound mark on the military history of the post-war world. It is not the most advanced tank of its time. That distinction goes to later models, such as the Soviet T-55 or the American M60, but its legacy is cemented in its role as the cornerstone of the Allied tank force during World War II. The Sherman's sheer numbers, the speed at which it was produced, and its ability to keep fighting in harsh conditions made it a symbol of industrial superiority. Its influence extends beyond the battlefield into the very heart of military doctrine, where it becomes clear that logistical capability and the ability to maintain forces over extended periods are just as important as cutting-edge technology. In the years following the war, the Sherman becomes a symbol of American ingenuity. While the Soviet Union pursues its own course of military and industrial development, the United States begins to shift its focus toward the coming Cold War. With the Soviet Union as a new adversary, the lessons learned from World War II, particularly the importance of mass production and technological resilience, are applied in new military innovations. The impact on the Cold War arms race. The end of World War II marks the beginning of a new geopolitical conflict, the Cold War. The rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union shapes the next several decades of global history. Tanks, military technology, and the ability to produce them at a scale that exceeds the opponent's capacity become crucial to the ongoing struggle for supremacy. The M4 Sherman's role in this conflict, while less visible, remains fundamental. The experience of mass-producing reliable, effective tanks under the pressure of total war informs the development of new weapon systems and military strategies. The M4 Sherman also directly influences the development of NATO's military strategies, particularly in Europe, where the presence of large Soviet forces requires a robust and sustainable counterforce. The sheer logistics capability of the U.S. military, honed during the Lend-Lease era, ensures that the American military remains a formidable force throughout the Cold War. The M4 Sherman effect, the ability to produce a reliable, mass-produced tank capable of withstanding the pressures of war, continues to influence military doctrine in both the Western and Eastern blocs. The end of the Sherman's frontline role and its place in history. By the 1952, newer, more advanced tanks such as the M47 Patton and the Soviet T-55 replaced the M4 Sherman in the active combat roles. However, the Sherman does not fade into obscurity. Its design, simplicity, and ruggedness make it an ideal candidate for use in a variety of post-war roles. Many Shermans are converted for use as artillery tractors, armored personnel carriers, and even amphibious vehicles. The M4 Sherman continues to serve as a reminder of the power of American industrial production and logistical superiority. Its legacy also lives on in the numerous conflicts that follow World War II, particularly in the wars of decolonization and the early stages of the Cold War. M4 Shermans, are used by both Allied and Axis-aligned countries in various regional conflicts. The tank's design, so effective during World War II, proves to be versatile enough for use in diverse environments, from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Southeast Asia. In many of these conflicts, the Sherman serves as a symbol of American support for its allies, a reminder of the Lend-Lease program that helped secure the freedom of nations during World War II. The Sherman's role in shaping modern warfare. The M4 Sherman's importance goes beyond its direct military use. It becomes part of the collective memory of the war and, in many ways, serves as the archetype of a modern war machine, a product of mass production and industrial capability. The Sherman's design principles are applied to countless other military technologies in the years to come, influencing everything from tank construction to aircraft and logistics. The Lend-Lease program, and the M4 Sherman specifically, show that war is not won on the battlefield alone. It is won through the ability to outproduce and sustain forces over time. In a world where military power is increasingly defined by technological innovation and industrial capacity, the Sherman's legacy is evident. It stands as a symbol of the strategic importance of logistics, the power of mass production, and the idea that warfare is not just about having the best technology, it's about the ability to sustain that technology and keep fighting, no matter the odds.